Great, and I will. I want us to have time for some questions, and so I'll try to be brief in talking a little bit about what Lumina's working on and responding a little bit to what everyone else says. I'm kind of the cleanup person because most of them have talked about some really important points as it relates to college affordability. The first that I'll really highlight is just the importance of college completion as we talk about college affordability. The statistic that I always go back to when I think about student debt and I think about its impact on society is that the average balance of a loan in default is actually lower than the average balance of a loan in repayment. Now, we don't know a ton. Senator Warren kind of discussed her frustrations with the data at the Department of Education. So we don't know a ton about why that is. But a lot of us, policy wonks, speculate that that's because many people who default have never completed a college degree. So the longer you stay in college, unfortunately, the higher your loan balance is likely to be. And what we know about defaulters is that they are likely to not have completed. So what you're seeing is, that $9,000 or whatever, you're not paying that back with the returns of a bachelor's degree or even an associate's degree or even a high-value certificate. You've got the same minimum wage job that you had before. Now you're just $9,000 in debt. Mm-hmm. And so I think we've really got to think about the affordability crisis, yes, but also what that affordability and quality are really aligned. And as I kind of really dig into this, I think there are some maximum amounts that we should think about in terms of how much debt is too much and how much we should be limiting borrow. But we've also got to think about the quality of the educational experience. The horror that was the Corinthian College student saga is not just because they spent a lot of money, but because when you look at the average amount of their programs, I think that the problem was the relationship of what the cost was to the quality of what you're getting. And so obviously there's, Sarah and I have been in many conversations where I press people on, like, what's the highest amount, and the economists will always say, well, no amount of college is too, no price is too high as long as you get, something out of it, which is a very economist way to think about, about things. And that's not the way students and families experience higher education. But we do have to think about the quality of what you're getting. So I'm trying to use not inflammatory examples in this context, but I will say if your local burger joint started charging $100 for hamburgers, I would say that's ludicrous, for a hamburger. I feel like that's not, if it's, a quarter pounder or something like that, that's not ridiculous. It's not because I'm not blessed enough to have $100 of discretionary income. It's because I don't think that that's relative to the value. And so we've got to think about the completion crisis, which is a crisis. Over 50% of students that start do not finish. And so we are looking, this is a crowd that's probably used to discussing many of the issues in K-12 education. And I think about how much we wring our hands about the high school graduation rates. And if we had, high school graduation rates in this nation of 50%, which is about what our college graduation rate was, it would be, and we do have that in some high schools. But so I think we've just got to think about these things hand in hand because they're not easy to separate. So I'm going to mention a couple of initiatives, and sorry if they're a little bit disjointed, but I'm hoping that we can spend some time to talk about them in more detail in the few minutes that we'll have left. The first is this idea of giving students credit for the courses that they've already completed. I can't remember, I think it was Sarah or someone who mentioned it, but at Lumina we've been funding this work called Credit When It's Due. So the idea of, there are many people who have completed a lot of credits, but they didn't do them exactly in the sequence that they were supposed to, or they did them in a disjointed way, or they were credits toward a bachelor's degree and then they weren't able to complete. Well, lo and behold, they've already earned an associate's degree, and we've been working with states to actually find those people and give them associate's degrees, which just requires you matching some data in your state systems. But to think about what have people already achieved and rewarding them for that. So that's called Credit When It's Due, and I think it's just one of my most one of the things that I think we're doing a really good job on and working with states that's really promising and it actually just takes some kind of gumption to do it. The other thing is really thinking about how we got into the mess of financial aid and student loans that we're in now. This has been something that, as you heard by bio, I've spent some time in government, and it's just one of one of the most challenging situations. And as a student of political science, I was originally, it's really great to be here because originally I wanted to be a social studies teacher, and I got my degree in secondary education in political science, and I did my student teaching in high school social studies. And so I just think that I'm fascinated by kind of the socio-political kind of how we got to where we are. So we've been doing a film series, it's kind of mini documentaries on the history of student aid. And it's fascinating because when you think back to like Lyndon B. Johnson and the Higher Education Act of 1965 and the doors that it was supposed to open, to be fair, I mean, I think it did open a lot of doors. Many more people go to college now than they did before. And so in some ways, I bristle a little bit when Senator Warren says she wants to return to 50 years ago, because I don't want to return to 50 years ago. When I think about where my parents were in higher education 50 years ago, it's not some place that I want to go back to. However, I think that we can build a lot. Obviously, where we are now is not where we want to be, and we need to be building. But was Senator Pell and Representative Stafford, were they evil people trying to create a world where Sallie Mae has trillions of dollars and students are going in debt? No, they were trying to figure something out, and somehow we messed up. And so I really think it's important to look at what steps led us to where we are now, because I won't say that I don't think there are some bad people who are trying to, profit off of where we are now, but by and large, the policymakers that created the systems that we have now were not trying to create some horrible system. They were trying to do something good at some point. And so when I talked to my grandmother, who just randomly also worked in higher education, and she's from South Carolina, and she worked in the South Carolina Commission on Higher Education as their director of access and equity. She's been retired for 25 years or so. She did that for a really long time, which was a huge accomplishment from a woman that was the daughter of sharecroppers and things like that. But in any case, when I talked to her about how she was able to go to college in the 50s in South Carolina, she was like, well, I got a scholarship. And so many other people didn't get a scholarship. You had to be the absolute best to even have your foot in the door, because as a daughter of sharecroppers, they had no money. It wasn't like, oh, I wish I didn't, wish I didn't have to sacrifice this college vacation or whatever. And there were no student loans available to her where she was. And so when they became available, she was like, the idea that someone would take a chance on me and give me a loan, to go to college. And I knew I could pay it back if they just gave me that opportunity. That was the spirit of kind of where this came out of. Actually, when you interviewed people that were working on these programs, they said they wanted to create this huge scholarship program. And they realized that they could do that, but they could only serve a limited number of people. And if they created a loan program, they could serve more people. So that's just obviously like math, right? And so they did both. They created scholarships and they created loans. And somehow, through a series of kind of different, policy choices, we've created a loan program that doesn't give people hope and opportunity as the, once did. We've created something that people are afraid of and that chases them down until they're into retirement and garnishes their Social Security checks, which is literally what we do. And so we've got to think about what were the purposes of why we tried to do this, and how do we get somewhere back to creating that hope and opportunity. And I think, so the whole point of that was to plug the documentary series, which we don't make any money off of it. I just created it because we're a foundation, and we have, as the foundation, you have resources, so you want to make the world a better place, so you can go online, luminafoundation.org, and look at the documentary series. They're really short. I thought people don't have a lot of time to look at long documentaries on things, even if you're really interested. So they're kind of created to be able to watch in your lunch break, 15 minutes or less for each film. And it's just really, at the end of them, I said, well, what do you want me to do about this? And I said, I'm not really sure. I don't, also as a foundation, we can't, advocate for specific legislation, right? But I do want us to think about this, and we're all collectively trying to wrestle with this problem, do it in a way that's informed by how we got here so that we don't make the same mistakes of the past. So that's all I will say for now, and I'm hoping that we can have a robust conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.